Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. This week, my guest is Will Angelero. He's a producer, engineer, mixer, musician, sound man. He's everything. He's from New York. He's one of the biggest influences for me growing up on my music taste. And we get to talk about synths. We get to talk about New York, CBGBs. We talk about his stage at Glastonbury that he runs. We talk about synths again. We talk about Tony Hawk. Dave Davies from the Kinks. We talk about all kinds of things. It's a real rambling chat. It's two good friends just having a conversation. So check this one out. Here it is.
For the price. I mean, probably the best value mic you can ever get. What the hell are we talking about?
Right, yeah. So this is.
Do I need cans?
Only if you want. I mean, you know mics, so you
I
don't
could probably
have to.
hear you better with the cans on.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Because this. So this is called the Giant Pod, basically. And I only talk to giants.
That's great.
It's basically about life stories and things like that, and interesting people who've done interesting things.
And why do you have me here?
Well, because I want to know how a big giant New Yorker, audio engineer, producer ends up in a small English town 20 years ago before it was cool, basically. Yeah. But I just would generally want to hang out and talk because we always have such interesting conversations. Like the other night when we were talking about Pee Wee Ellis and the fact that I'd love to.
I was more interested in the that weird organ guy you showed me, which I've watched a million videos of. Which, by the way, tell him about that.
Have you seen Barry Morgan's World of Organs? Oh, he's a podcast guest. Like he's on the wish list for the guests. Basically.
Oh my God, this guy is a genius. I've been obsessed with his videos.
Have you? Have you seen The Girl from Ipanema?
Girl from Ipanema.
Ipanema.
I know I haven't seen that one. That's one of my favorite songs. I can't wait to
and he's like, let's have a little trumpet on this now. It's great. It's amazing. I don't know what's that little animal he's got with him?
I don't even really know.
You're supposed to get the hand gel on your hands, not.
Well, no one says it's just for hands. Are we recording right now?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
This is the fucking preamble, mate. The preamble. Will Angelero.
Andy Wrintmore.
A native of, is it Long Island?
No, Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn?
Yes.
Why was I thinking?
Because I did move to Long Island. Well, I did. My parents did.
Your parents lived there, right.
So I spent probably more time there, but I'm born in Brooklyn and was back every weekend to see all the Italian family that we had there. Lots of them.
Because Angelero is Italian.
A little bit, yeah.
What's the history with that?
Of which part? The name
with the obviously you've got some Italian immigrants in your.
Well, I've got all Italian immigrants. All my grandparents either came over when they were young or were born immediately after from random parts of Italy and from Sicily as well. So yeah, it's interesting, and they all ended up like so many of them did in Brooklyn.
Right.
You know, that's once the Lower East Side of Manhattan was full, they all sort of spreading out a bit.
What was the why Brooklyn?
Well, if you know anything about sort of that early immigration into America, especially in the early 20th century, the port of entry, the main port of entry was New York. You'd come in past the Statue of Liberty, you'd park yourself at Ellis Island, and that's where they were processed. And if you were allowed into the country, they just sort of gave you a tag and said, okay, go. Here's the ferry over to Manhattan, and you're on your own. Right. So a lot of them just stayed. That's why you have so many immigrant parts of Manhattan, like you've heard of Chinatown, you've heard of Little Italy, and you know, that's why they sort of stopped. And the initial wave stayed in Manhattan, and then eventually spread out into the city, and then rest of the country, really. Which is interesting because a lot of the Germans didn't stay. They sort of went out west. So you see some much bigger German populations in Wisconsin and Ohio and all this. I have no idea why.
No idea why.
The Italians were like, I just did 4,000 miles on a ship for 3 months. I'm going to stay right here. Thank you very much.
That is it. That is actually quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Why that? why they stayed, and why the Germans went? Is it?
I did, no idea. No idea.
Do you think it would have been because the Germans didn't want to be? They wanted their own space. They didn't subscribe to the multicultural.
Everyone else wanted their own space too, but if
Right.
they didn't leave, they just sat around and fought with each other. I mean, the
Right.
Irish and the original Dutch settlers, and of course all the African Americans coming up freed slaves. Everyone just was at each other's throats. That's sort of the tension that built New York.
And that's what makes New York so culturally significant, isn't it? That's what everything worthy of.
Well, there's
has
everything
come out
there.
of New York.
Every nationality is represented at one point or another, and you can probably get food from almost every nation somewhere in New York City, which I do miss here in Frome.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to get into is like you have a history, obviously, of being on the music scene in New York. I know you've hung out with some heavy hitters and grown up with people that have gone on to have incredible careers.
Yeah, all my old friends got famous except me.
I remember you telling me that once.
Well, I spent a brief period of time playing in some really heavy bands, which you would have loved, and quite a few of the people that were on the scene with us did really, really well, and we didn't. But that's fine.
So why do you think you didn't and they went on to...
The band I was in were far more Motorhead than actual hardcore. We were
Right.
just sort of up in that scene. I don't know why. Why does anything happen in the music industry? It's impossible to tell. Maybe we just weren't very good. But we had a lot of people that come to see us play, so who knows?
Okay.
You never can tell.
Can I hear any of this? Where can I get this?
Oh, God. I'd have to find you some. I have some CDs buried somewhere, yeah. You'd be absolutely shocked to hear me playing.
What were you playing
fast.
guitar?
I was playing guitar, yeah.
Lead?
Yeah, mostly. But it's not very much of a solo kind of genre. It's a riff genre. Really.
How did you approach a solo?
Yeah, usually just opening up the overdrive and letting it feedback. We did a cover of The Blue Mask by Lou Reed. That's
Right.
the kind of thing we're talking about. If you've never heard the Blue Mask, it's one of the most offensive of his solo stuff. It's so loud, a wall of noise, layers and layers of guitar. It's incredible. But yeah, a lot of the stuff sounded like that.
So I know that you're into a lot of electro. It's not even electro, is it?
Electronic music of all sorts, yes. That's probably what I listen to mostly. And probably even at my biggest, rockest eras in my life, I've always listened to electronic music. Some of the first music I ever heard after the initial listening to the Beatles and the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead that my dad and my uncle introduced me to in the blues stuff. But probably 7, 8 years old, I was obsessed with things like Donna Summer and M and pop music and some of the weirder things I had
Studio
heard.
54 type.
Oh, no, not at all. None of the commercial disco. Donna
Right.
Summer, she did a few records with Giorgio Moroder, which are really, really weird and pioneering. Giorgio Moroder, whose aside from his solo stuff, had a feature on the last Daft Punk album, just sort of telling his history and going through the kind of approach he did to his late phase when he discovered the Moog synthesizer. And those records like I Feel Love, you listen to them now without hearing it when it came out, you don't get the impact. It's like that early Beatles stuff, I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yeah.
It sounds so twee compared to some of the other Beatles stuff. But at the time,
Yeah.
those chord changes just weren't done. Nothing had ever sounded like that before. And that's why they were so revolutionary. And I'm not comparing Donna Summer to the Beatles, but I am comparing the impact that Giorgio Moroder had on electronic music, taking a very European Kraftwerky feel and slapping it on American soul music. And that was the birthplace of house, lots of stuff.
And why do you think you gravitated towards? Because I feel like we're although we have an awful lot of middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
we're opposite ends of the spectrum there. Because my passion is I'm all about rock and roll, basically. I love lots of other things, lots of other genres, but pure electronic music like house or drum and bass or even gabba.
Well, that's electronic dance music.
Yeah.
Electronic music, it's hard to say Kraftwerk, for example, were, while there's some of their stuff you could dance to anything if you're creative enough. I would say that was pioneering electronic music. But even they weren't the first. I mean, you could look at artists like Stockhausen before that, which are definitely not going to throw on at a party, or at least not a good party.
You would.
Yeah, I might if I wanted everybody out. But I mean, the first time I think, aside from a handful of artists, Kraftwerk were probably the first group to sort of synthesize arrangements and classical influences and modern pop music, specifically the Beach Boys, which is all over the Autobahn record. You can hear it. I found it as a kid fascinating, and I'm trying to think of what I was thinking when I was 8, 9 years old, and I think I go back to what is that sound? What is making that sound? I get the guitar, the bass, the drums, even the organ. What is making those sounds? And I've been obsessed ever since. Trying to make something that doesn't sound like anything else, necessarily in nature.
So what is there a moment you can think of where you had that epiphany for electronic music? Was there something that really just sort of captured your mind in sort of a developmental stage?
Yeah, I would say aside from all the hipster bands, like I mentioned in Kraftwerk, but I can't say aside from a few songs, I was aware of them at age 9. I wasn't going around, hey, I'm listening to some German music, It wasn't like that. What I heard was the very rare breakthroughs into pop music, and incidentally, the song is called Pop Music by a strange group called M, just the letter M.
Is that the one that's like, pop music?
Yeah, that's it. What is going on? And then I went and bought the single, the 12-inch single, which I still own, and then I bought the full LP, and it's weird. It's really weird. On the flip side of that, and I was very happy to listen to an interview with Trent Reznor, who basically articulated what I've thought for years. Pink Floyd, specifically the Wall album, which came out the same year, is strange. There's weird stuff going on that record. I mean, we're so used to it now, and it's so part of the conversation. But when it came out, and you listen to that with no idea of what a synthesizer is, or even what guitar effects pedals are to that point, the album is dark,
right,
and strange, and sonically the palette was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Even earlier Pink Floyd, which I was vaguely aware of, Dark Side of the Moon at that age, but it just made me want to make different sounds,
right?
You know what I mean? To explore something.
Was there a limitlessness to it?
Well, have you ever listened to All of the Wall by Pink Floyd?
I've got to tell you, I haven't.
Yeah,
I almost bought it actually on eBay the other night.
It's a really bizarre record.
I've seen the film.
Take
so
away.
I guess I have heard it all.
No,
but it's a different experience, isn't it?
Take away the lyrics, the songs, the concept, which is bonkers to begin with, and just look at the sonic palette. What does it sound like? And again, it's a masterpiece, and it's of experimentation and arrangement. And again, I wasn't aware of that at age 9. I was just like, what is this?
And who's the orchestrator of that? Is that Roger Waters? Or was that another member of the band that got really into the synth side?
Pink Floyd, The Wall. Well, Richard Wright was the keyboard player, and I'm not even just talking about synthesizer stuff. I'm talking about music concrete. The idea of avant-garde music and tape loops and all these things, and even reverse sounds. All these things were packed into that one record. Found sounds. Cars driving by and strange, eerie, creaky things. It could be a synth. It could be like Foley type sounds. You can't tell. I mean, now I know. Now I can tell you exactly how it was made. But at the time, it was just floored me. Who was responsible would be the God oversight of it would have been Roger Waters. But the producer on that album was a guy named Bob Ezrin, who is known for, they call him the kitchen sink because he just throws everything in. He actually had worked on a few Kiss records.
That's where I know the name from mostly, yeah. Did he do the early Kiss records?
No, he did like
Dynasty, probably.
Some of the later 70s, far more large sounding ones. The early rock Kiss records, which I love, and they're probably the ones I go back to.
Yeah.
Just good
they
rock and roll
don't sound
records.
that great, though. They sound pretty crap.
No, they sound like raw rock
and
demos,
roll.
yeah.
But it was
specifically the first album is my favorite Kiss album.
Our mutual friend John, when I was getting into Kiss, I usually pass a lot of things that I'm really getting into through you and John. And he said that the problem with the early Kiss records is that
2 tin cans and a piece of string.
right, and the rest of the budget went up their nose.
Yep. John's been using, and he's been using that term since I've known him, almost 40 years, and he's completely right. And the first time I heard him say an album sounded like it was recorded with 2 tin cans and a piece of string was talking about the Technical Ecstasy album by Black Sabbath. No, not even that one. Never Say Die, which is
right.
the last Ozzy records, and they are just they sound like everyone was asleep at the wheel.
I remember asking you once because just for a bit of history, you work at the college that I went to in my big school, I guess you'd call it. And in my earliest, most musically impressionable years, you were my guru, and you still pretty much are to a big extent. But I remember one day saying, "Oh, Black Sabbath." I used to push everything past you. What do you think, Black Sabbath? And you said the first 6 albums, and then leave it alone.
Well, see, if you speak to John, he'll have a different opinion. Right. He'll definitely say the first 6 albums, but he's not convinced me since 1986 that the 2 Dio albums are absolutely brilliant.
They are incredible.
Yeah,
Will.
I know.
I had them on earlier.
I know.
Just Sign of the Southern Cross is Satan. If Satan was a WWE wrestler, Sign of the Southern Cross, that riff would be his entrance music, man.
I wish I was an artist to draw that. Satan with Sabbath. But no,
and later I got a T-shirt which reminded me of that thing you'd said to me at that age, which said, "You can only trust yourself and the first 6 Black Sabbath albums."
They are good records.
Doesn't fit
they
me
are good
anymore.
records, yeah.
Yeah, the only tattoo I have is the Black Sabbath bat. That's the only thing I've committed to my body forever. But
but even if you start talking about weird sounds, and it's a little bit less subtle than Pink Floyd was, but something like The Writ or Who Are You, with Bob Daisley on synthesizers, it brought a really odd sound to that. And I used to love that. I used to love, what kind of keyboard is that? One of the first bands I was ever in when I was a teenager, we had a keyboard player, and he had this crappy little Korg Poly 800, which I tell you what, I'd kill to have one right now. We didn't know what we had. Then he went on to have a DW 8000, which was a lovely polyphonic Korg, early Korg synth, early MIDI Korg synth. And we always tried playing with these buzzy and these sweeping sounds, and he just couldn't do what you could do with them from synths 5 years earlier that would triple the price and 50 times bigger. But we always loved it. We were a rock band. We were doing, covers, and we did Led Zeppelin and with what was it from the last album? All My Love, with the big, glorious synth parts. We could never quite get it right, but I loved it. We loved zeroing in, trying to get that sound.
I remember seeing a video of Pete Townsend using a synth for Baba O'Reilly.
A VC, Synthy VC. You'll know this. I'm looking at our esteemed synth Synthy VC. So it was the one that Eno used in Roxy Music. It had, instead of a patch bay, it had these little things you put in. But that's what he was using in Baba O'Reilly.
Yeah,
with a primitive sequencer.
And they put in there. They all had. This was at the time when they had spiritual guides. I think they literally had gurus.
Yeah, his name was Maya Baba.
Right,
which is where the Baba
O'Reilly. Yeah. And they put his birthday into that was the I don't know how you'd sequence the synth in those days.
Who knows?
But they managed to translate his birthday into the thing and into the synth, and that is the pattern that they got.
Synthy VCS, that's what it's called.
This is saying here that it was a Lowry organ.
Not on Bob O'Reilly. No, or was it? I thought it was a Synthy. Oh, look at me!
I remember seeing a big building full of things with like a patch bay.
I thought he had a modular on that.
And he was explaining, if I take this out here and I stick this one in here, then I get it was a bit of Spinal Tap, and I get a different thing here. Perhaps
that's all coming back now. And it's always been a sort of fringe element of musicians. The modular synth. These guys that build their own modules or they trade modules. There's whole conventions in Germany. It's crazy. And a lot of times I listen to these massive wall-size synths, and it's just bleeps and bops and interesting noises, but there's no music.
Right.
Anyway, what's happening now is they've gotten really cheap, and Behringer is putting out actual modular synths, and people are starting to use them that could never afford them now. And I'm starting to hear some really interesting sounds coming out. I listen to Six Music all the time, and there's some bands that are coming out. I'm like, well, that sounds great, and then it's actually a really good song.
I'm trying to think of stuff that I listen to that has a synth in it that I really, really like. I like a lot of Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
I like some of that early, like we were talking about The Who and some of the sort of element. I think is there a synth in some Black Sabbath? Doesn't Rick Wakeman play some synth?
No, it's Bob. Rick Wakeman might have, but Bob Daisley. I was thinking on the song "Who Are You," which is a really eerie track.
Have you heard of a band called The Midnight?
No.
It's like an 80s synth thing. And it's basically the neon and the Miami Beach thing.
Are they a modern band, or were they from?
No, it's a modern thing,
Right.
and he just recreates this 80s sound. I don't know if they call it retro wave or something.
I don't know. I think the masters in the last, and they're not even new anymore. They're old, but the masters of retro who have updated it properly were Hot Chip. I think they took the sound of as a group like the Cars in the 80s, which was just a sort of a standard rock band out of Boston, but they had a very interesting synth aspect to it, the same as the Talking Heads at times. And that was, bands using a synth. I think in the 90s, a great retro band was the Rentals as well, who were offshoot of Weezer, who I'm sure you've heard of.
Heard of Weezer.
Yeah, and they had 3 synths, a violin player, and just the bass through so much distortion. It was so much fun. And I think Hot Chip has taken the more Depeche Mode approach to it.
Right.
So there's always people pushing the boundaries, but maintaining something interesting. And this is all apart from electronic dance music, which is a whole different thing altogether.
A whole different world.
Yeah, which I could speak about for hours, and I won't bore you.
So you've grown up in Brooklyn. You found your affinity with dance music, electronic music, synths. You find yourself though in a heavy band, a rock band. Do you play CBGBs? Do you play Max's Kansas?
Max's was gone by the time
Right.
we were playing, but CBs I played a few times in a few different acts. In fact, if you want to talk about synths, the first few times I played there was with that heavy band I told you about. Went back there years ago with a group I was in called Flexido Junction, which still exists in weird conceptual form to this day, with my great friend Scott Kukla, who is one of
I know
John's.
Scott a little bit.
One of John Scott and I are still very close. We were pushing the opposite end. We were doing completely conceptual. We like to think of ourselves as Fluxus artists, which is why we were called Flexido Junction. So we would go out with, for example, 2 turntables, going through effects pedals, a synthesizer, an organ, more sample pads, and random various percussion all into microphones through tape loops. I mean, it was complete art. It wasn't again, not something you throw on at a party. And we managed to hook up with a poet named John Sinclair, who was once upon a time the manager of the MC5. So this was this ancient
I was going to say,
hippie
why do
guy.
I know that name?
Yeah. Well, John Lennon wrote a song about him called John Sinclair. So we did a song together in the studio. We just managed to get him out to the island, and we did this track, and it was great. And he lived in New Orleans, and he would tour around occasionally with the I think they were called the Jazz not the Jazz Passengers or whatever. I can't remember what they were called, but Wayne Kramer from the MC5 was in it, but he wasn't in the version that came to New York when he asked us to play with him at CB's again. So there's this drummer, double bass player, a guitarist, him out there reading poetry. And
What kind of poetry is it?
Oh, it's really anarchist, sort of ultra leftist.
Is it got like a beat vibe to it?
Very much so. That's
Right.
where it comes from.
Yeah.
I could find you that track quickly. And then in me scratching records through effects pedals and whacking on sample pads. It was really bizarre, really hard to listen to, but so much fun. And the people that were there were just old bikers and old anarchists from the 60s. So they were like far out, man. All the cliches you can think of. We're way out of our element, Scott and I, but it was great.
But that's
fun.
where you've got to go, isn't
Yeah.
it? You've got to go out your comfort zone.
Yeah.
to make interesting things happen.
Yeah.
And almost wing it. Man, the MC5. I had the I bought the live album actually much later on in my.
What, the first album?
Yeah,
That's their first album was a live album.
yeah,
Which is strange because usually you do a few albums,
Yeah.
then you put out a live album. They're like, forget it. First album they ever put out.
live.
I
Jane's
think-
Addiction did that.
Partially, that was
Yeah.
the EP they did. Yeah, that was the one with the Velvet Underground cover, Rock and Roll.
Ah,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I got given a Velvet Underground LP today.
Which one?
It's the one. It's not got. It's black and white on the front, and it's without one of the key.
John Cale.
It's without John Cale.
So,
I'm not massive on the Velvet Underground. This is going to be
It's
educational.
all right. There's clinics you can go to have that fixed.
Yeah, and I was going to say. So yeah, I got the MC5 album way later in my
Yeah.
rock and roll education, let's say, than I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I knew Kick Out the Jams.
Yeah.
But Wayne Kramer he's like some sort of evangelist preacher on that album.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, let's come together. Let's do this. Are you ready to? And I was listening to this thing thinking, this is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's them and their sister group was the Stooges.
Yeah.
Are definitely the foundation DNA for punk, really.
Yeah. What
yeah.
the musos like to call proto-punk.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. But then you get all those 60s garage bands,
The
like the
Sonics.
Count Five or the Sonics. It's also part of it. It's Question Mark and the Mysterians.
How's this for hipster, right? And Kurt Cobain once said that his favorite ever snare sound was the snare sound from the Sonics.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Which
Probably
is mad.
recorded with two mics on the kit in someone's garage in
Yeah.
Minnesota somewhere.
They didn't. I think they were Seattle based.
Seattle.
They didn't know how famous they were until the alternative rock thing blew up in the 90s, because they left it alone in the 60s, late 60s maybe.
It's all packed up and got regular jobs.
Yeah. They were like families, whatever. They didn't realize that there was this whole generation of superstars coming up who are all beginning to cite them as influences. And then they realize that, oh my God, we're this massive band and we didn't even know it.
Have you heard of the band? They were called Death.
Is this the punk band or is this the death metal band?
Not the death metal band, the all African American
Yeah, I have.
mid-70s punk band.
I interviewed Tony Hawk once,
Yeah.
and we got talking about a documentary about death, and I still haven't watched it, but he was
They were
banging on about it.
fantastic. There was them, and there was another band out of Australia called the Saints, who all sort of arrived at the same sound outside of America, which is really
So
bizarre. Yeah.
strange, isn't it? It must be the influence of something much larger and international.
Who
which
knows?
Isn't necessarily
Did I-
applicable.
Did I ever tell you my Tony Hawk story?
No.
Okay, so I met Tony Hawk as well.
Yeah.
So this is probably late 90s. I had a small PA system, and it was Scott working for a record label,
Right.
Scott Kuka, and he had Dave Davies from the Kinks
Yeah.
coming to play a solo show.
I'll tell you my Dave Davies story in a minute.
So he was coming to play a solo show. So I was going to go to Midtown Manhattan to the giant, monstrous Tower Records in the big court in the middle. And they had a little stage, and I was setting the PA up, and we were getting Dave plugged in and going to do his show. And there's a bunch of old hippies standing around, probably about 25, 30 guys standing there, and probably 400 kids, just complete silence, all standing there and watching us with their skateboards in there. So I was like, this is really weird. What the hell is going on here? And Scott and I were talking to the manager, the liaison, whatever, and some other guy was over there. We're like, who are all these kids here to see? They're not here to see Dave Davies. And the guy I was talking to, he's like, I think they're here to see me. I'm like, who the hell are you? So he puts his, I'm Tony Hawk. I'm a professional skateboarder. I'm like, you can make money doing that?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of him. Had no idea who he was.
He's much taller than I thought he would be.
Well, it wasn't to me.
No, not to you, because you're a gigantic man
I,
as well.
I have since learned quite a bit about him, but that was it. I had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's, from the small amount of time I spent with him, very, very nice guy.
He was one of many famous people I met who I didn't have a clue who they were.
Right.
Yeah, when I first moved here, I had was probably the first year I was asked to DJ at Babington House.
Right.
And I went about a week before to look at the place to see what the room looked like. And a person who I was doing the party for was talking to the Babington people, I guess. And have you ever been there?
I haven't. I've had
this
invites. I've never gone.
Beautiful little chapel sort of right in front of the main house.
Right.
And I was sitting there, looking at it and looking around the building. And this woman was waiting there. And we got to talking. And I said, that's beautiful. She's like, oh, yeah, I got married here. I'm like, oh, did you get married in there? And she's like, nah, I didn't. We got married down in Brighton and we came up here for our big party. So I told her what I was doing. And I said, well, have a good night. My husband's coming. We're going to go. And I didn't even saw the husband walk by in the corner of my eye. And she said, great time. See you later. Nice to meet you. Walks out. And the person whose party it was goes, do you know who that was? I said, no, I have no idea. Yeah. She goes, that was Zoe Ball. I said, I don't know who Zoe Ball is. She's a famous DJ here. And I'm like, oh, God, I didn't know that. That's really cool. Yeah, she's married to Fatboy Slim, who literally walked in my peripheral vision a foot and a half to the left of me. No idea. I was huge Fatboy. I still am huge Fat. At the time, I was way into his stuff.
Right.
Walked right past me. Didn't even notice him.
Did you go in on, has he got a lot of deep cuts, Fatboy Slim?
Is he?
Because I know he's got monster big iconic hits, but has he got super deep cuts?
Well, he's like Aphex Twin, releases under a lot of different names. But if you want something fun, dig up the Brighton Port Authority,
right?
The BPA.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, it was great. It's collaborations with Iggy Pop and Talking Heads. It's really good. I think Charlotte Gainsbourg is on that one as well. Yeah, very fun album to listen to. It's as soon as you know who it is, you go, oh God, of course it is, because it's just so Norman Cook,
Yeah. I've seen him, where have I seen him? Seen him a couple times at Glastonbury.
Yeah, he always
does
does
there
that
every week.
DJ set at the whatever that is, the one that looks like a giant city block.
Yeah, oh God, what is that called?
Down near the dance field.
Yeah, that's in the dance village, as they call it now,
yeah.
near Sonic. I can't remember what it's called now. I know what you mean, though. It looks like a favela.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's great. It's fucking loud. That system is so loud.
And he only ever does DJ sets. This is, which I really enjoy, but I would love to have seen him. I don't think he ever has gone out and done a full set.
Thing. Yeah.
It's always DJing. Whereas you go, so I'm really into Orbital and groups like that, and the Chemical Brothers, who bring out everything they own.
Yeah.
Stacks of synths, and they're all on, and they're all feeding through a mixer, and they all have, small remote sequencers, so they're improvising, they're bringing tracks in and out. It's a hell of an undertaking, but I would have loved to seen him do that. But
didn't you choose to see the Chemical? No, you went to see Public Enemy over Rolling Stones at Glastonbury.
No, I've seen Public Enemy at Glastonbury, but I saw the Chemical Brothers over the Who. Yeah.
Yeah. It was see, that's where we differ. Where I respect the Chemical Brothers.
Mind you, that particular show is considered one of the greatest shows ever. And I was there, man.
I was there, baby. So yeah, my Dave Davies story. Let's get this out of the way because I realised I teased it and I never went there. But I'd like to come back to Glastonbury in a minute and talk about your stage there. But where do you think I met Dave Davies?
Oh God,
of the Kinks fame.
Please don't tell me the cheese and grain. No, I have no idea.
I met him at work.
Well, over here.
Yeah, down there.
All right.
Yeah, and I said, and it was him. It was him. And I've told this story recently. I think I told you, Harry. So I said, are you Dave Davies? And he went, no, I'm not. But I get that a lot. And I knew it because he's got a very distinct voice.
Right.
And I've seen documentaries about him.
But why would he say he's not?
Wasn't.
It's not like he's
Right.
It's like Ozzy walking and going, no, it's not me.
Right. And I said, oh, okay. But then I don't know I didn't know how to react because I'm not going to stand there and go, bullshit, you're Dave Davies.
If it ever happens again, I can tell you exactly how to get a reaction out of Dave Davies. What did you do?
I've met him twice now. Right, so then he goes, oh, what's a falafel thing, right? He's buying a vegan wrap thing. And we're talking about this rap, and I'm thinking, here's the guy that's written all these riffs, right? And I'm meeting him, he's denying it's him, and he wants to talk about a bloody vegan rap, okay? So I did that, right? And we did I did the niceties thing. I knew it was him, right? I knew it was fucking him. And I said to him, when I gave him his change, I said, don't worry, mate, if you were, I wouldn't have made a big deal about it. I gave him a little wink. just trying to play it cool, like I know you, I know who you are, but I'll play your game. It's fine. And then he came in the next week, came to the till again, and he sort of waited for me till I was free. And he came to my till, and he kind of gave me that look. I gave him a look like, all right, mate. And then we had a bit of a chat, and I was chatting to, do you know Andy Morton?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, he runs a magazine called Shindig for the listeners, a very 60s centric magazine.
I've seen it. Yeah.
And I said, hey, you never guess who I just met? I met Dave Davies of the Kinks. Think he'd be super jealous. He was like, yeah, we were hanging out with Ray the other day. And he said that Dave's down here down in the area looking at houses.
So
and I went and I Googled him on my lunch break. Yeah. And he had the same ring and the same bloody jacket on. Then,
so next time he comes in, if he does it, if he denies being Dave Davies, just say, "Is it true Jimmy Page played the lead guitar on You Really Got Me?" Just ask him that. Watch him go through the roof.
Do you think he'll get defensive?
He might start smashing stuff up at the counter. It was me. I've been 50 years.
But he knows I know who he is, and I know he knows, and it's cool. We're groovy. I doubt I'll ever see him again, but. That was just an interesting. When someone says they're not that person, they are. It's so weird.
So after he did the thing at Tower, the next day, I think it was the next day, maybe it was even the same evening, he had an industry showcase at some club downtown in Manhattan. So Scott and I went, and it was a great show. It was good fun. Get on the train, head back to Long Island. I'm on the Long Island Railroad, and the late train back to Long Island is notorious. It's just the most awful thing because it's all the really drunk Long Islanders heading back to suburbs, thinking they've been in the city and they can do whatever the hell they want and trash the place. And it was just horrible. I walked into this car, and it was like walking into 1983. There was just metalheads everywhere. I mean, cut off denim,
battle jackets
everywhere, patches, and this guy got right in my face. Threw the devil horns in my head and screamed, "Priest, were you there?" I didn't know Judas Priest had played Madison Square Garden that night, the same night I was down there seeing Dave Davies downtown. So I was like, no, I didn't go to see Priest. And the look of disappointment on this guy. He's like, oh. It was like a deflated. He went back, sat with his friends, and I had a 45-minute train ride of listening to all the greatest shows they had been through from like 1980 to 1992. I can tell you every great Iron Maiden show at Madison Square Garden these guys talked about nonstop. I was going to throw myself off the train.
Are you into Iron Maiden and Judas Priest?
I was just talking about this the other day. I liked them at the time. Again, nothing sounded like it ever. And I can still go back and listen to the first couple Iron Maiden records, and especially Judas Priest, for a short period.
Right.
You listen to it, appreciate it, really like it,
Yeah.
But I can't whack a whole record on and listen to it top to bottom anymore. I'll start losing my mind.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that. There's an awful lot of Iron Maiden that I really like. You should hear the 2015 remasters they did for vinyl. They just put them out digitally.
I'm sure they're great.
Oh my God. It's like a whole new band. I can't think of really another project of restoring old recordings other than the Beatles stuff, which is a whole totally different process. Where I was like, it's like made the band brand new again. The tone in the drums, everything, the bass. They went from like a pretty good band who's done very well off of a formula and a stage show to when you hear these remasters on Spotify, oh my God, these guys were actually fucking incredible.
And they were incredible.
The drums.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Nico McBrain was the drummer's name.
So good.
At least the second drummer, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I used to know all this stuff. So, yeah. But no, I don't. It's not something I'll go to first. So I'll put it on occasionally. I don't really like heavy music much anymore. And if I do, I tend to go with industrial. I listen to a lot of Ministry and some of the weird German bands. But I find it very, very flat, very one-sided,
Right.
It's quite... I mean, there are nuances, of course, in any genre of music, and people who listen to really heavy metal stuff will go on and on about the differences, and they're right. I find it a bit dull. Yeah. But then again, I can listen to Belgian trance for 6 hours straight and tell you all about all the subtle differences, and all you're going to hear is, you know what I mean? So
Right.
it's just taste, really. I just was never that angry. Even we've had the discussion, and I'm not going to get into it now with you, about what the definition of punk is. So even proper punk music, when it became punk rock, I find it gets very boring with 4 chords guitar and there's some guy shouting into the mic. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you could step off the distortion pedal and go into a 3/4 thing. The Slits were a perfect example of being able to go from completely raucous to reggae.
Yeah.
So I find anything that gets repetitive, I get bored of it really quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always remember when I would ask you about things back when I was like, however old I was, 15, 14, maybe even younger than that. And you'd say, no, I'm not into that. Doesn't mean they're not good.
Yeah.
And I remembered that because there's at that time you're surrounded by so many mates that go, oh no, don't listen to that. That's crap. And actually I try not to say that about any music because it just means that I don't get it.
Yeah.
Or there's something in it that I'm not.
Well,
I'm
you
not
might
seeing.
you might even get it completely and just say,
It's
not
not
my
for
cup
me.
of tea.
Yeah. And I liked that approach, which was like, it wasn't, that's hot, that's a crappy band. It's like, I'm not into them, but that doesn't mean you should think they're crap.
Yeah.
It's just that I'm not really into them.
Oh, exactly. It means something to someone.
Yeah.
If it's out there, every band's gonna find their audience. I think they're the greatest thing ever, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Just don't make me have to listen to it.
So you've gone from your live music days, playing CBGBs a handful of times, and probably some other legendary places in New York.
Continental was a big one. I played a lot.
What's the history of Continental?
Just a scum hole in the Lower East Side that's been there forever. They've actually I think they're closed now, but they managed to hold off a lot longer. It was just up the road from CB's, a little further up near St. Mark's Place.
And so how do you then get into, because you find yourself working in recording studios as a producer, don't you, or an engineer? How'd you get that leap?
I was the guy early on that liked the stuff. I'm the one who tried to figure out how the PA worked when I was singing bought one, trying to get it not to feed back. Then another guy in a different band bought a cassette 4-track, and it ended up at my house for 8 months at the time. I had the first drum machine. When I say drum machine, I mean really primitive stuff.
An 808?
Oh God, no. No.
Do you wish you had an 808?
At the time, I did. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be step sequencing now. It would drive me absolutely batty. Yeah, but I was the first person to do that. I was the first person recording vocals into a 4-track and going, "That sounds awful. Why?"
Right.
Probably because whenever it's all in the reds, it's terrible. And then I recorded it really here. It's all hissy. I started to figure out, there's a magic spot. Different mics, different. It was very, very gradual. I didn't jump into it right away.
So you self-taught, or did you have any sort of
probably
mentors?
about 1990, I finally decided to get the education, and I went to a technical school, an audio school, for a while, and got my little certificate there. And that was all learning. It was reel to reel. It was outboard effects, patch bays, and then there was a whole module on early MIDI as well. So I learned how to use, how MIDI works, which I'm not going to get into because it'll bore everyone listening. But that's where I learned, and I sort of had a little sampler and some keyboards, and I learned how to plug them into. I think my first computer was an IBM XT, 1984. It struggled with more than 64 tracks of MIDI.
Right.
No audio. It's just MIDI.
Right.
With the little card sticking out the back with the middle.
64 sounds quite advanced.
No, 64 MIDI channels. There's no audio in MIDI. It's nothing. This computer was ancient. It was meant to do spreadsheets back, So I started up from there, and it just picked up. By the time I started working in other studios, I had a site. I went in sort of knowing how a compressor works.
So did you get like a lucky break? Did you have to like make the teas and
I
stuff?
still haven't had a lucky break. So,
But like, I guess in New York City, There's a hell of a lot of competition, isn't there?
There is, and by this time I was working in studios out in the island, so it was while still a pain in the neck, nowhere near cutthroat.
Right.
As it was. I never would have been able to hack it that early on in New York City. I mean, the big places like the Record Plant, or there's no way. Electric Ladyland. I'm not going to be walking in age 19 to Electric Ladyland having done a few demo sessions for my friend's band on a cassette 4-track, But I could have gone in as a T-boy, but I didn't. I stayed out where I was, and I worked, and I was still playing in bands, and I wasn't going to make... It was always something else I did on top of playing music.
Right.
The switch, the emphasis didn't really turn until the mid-90s when I said, well, I want to do this a bit more, and now playing music is sort of another thing I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what sort of things did you find yourself recording and engineering in your early years? Was it mainly sort of rock and roll and scratchy punk?
Oh, yeah. It was all sorts. It was husband and wife with acoustic guitar who wanted a demo for cruise ships. It was...
Oh, wow. So
it was
really
local bands who played Tom Petty covers. It was, some metalheads, some real death metalheads, and all sorts of stuff. And that's doing session after session and week after week after week for years. I started thinking, well, maybe you should drop the bass out at that part, maybe, kind of bring this part out a bit more. And that was the sort of early seeds of production.
Right.
Really getting into it. I mean, this is producing not in the way we kind of think of it now. A lot of people will say, this guy's a producer because he makes tracks, he makes beats and then records a vocal on. He's a famous producer. A producer back then is the engineer who got all the mics and all the stuff sounding good, who then was getting involved with, to some degree or another,
the creative
arrangement
process.
and the creative process.
Do you get hands-on with that?
Depends on the artist.
Right.
I've got a project coming up where I'm going to be, right in there with the songwriting, and I've got stuff that I throw the mics up and go. So it's different for every artist. It also depends how much money they have, because I don't do it for free.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your strength? What's the strongest thing?
I think I work absolutely best with an artist who has great songs and trusts me to bring out to make them better.
So they're open and they're willing to.
If there's a trust, and a lot of times if they don't know me, I have to sort of go back and explain my process. Other people come to me and say, I want to do a demo, or I want to do an EP. And I'm like, I'm in this band, and I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. We'll choose a studio we go to. I've got several places I work out of that have different sounds for drums, some big ambient rooms, some really small, tight rooms. We'll pick it based on what they want to do and just go from there. We always end up back here in Frome to overdub and mix.
And so how do you end up in Frome? So when do you start? How do you get here?
Well, after the decision was made to move here, we decided to move here from New York. I had the option of going anywhere we wanted.
Right.
So, and I kind of liked the Southwest as a tourist, coming over here to visit. And that was it. It was just, we found it by accident. Someone said,
because your wife she's British.
Yeah,
right?
she's British, but she works for the NHS, so I was able to work anywhere I wanted.
Right.
Because she could work anywhere.
So how do you meet? Do you
we
come
met
here
in New York? No, we met in New York. She was living in New York working.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was she doing in New York?
Occupational therapy. That's what she does.
Oh.
Yeah. So we came over here, and I said, well, let's try Frome out and see what it's like. We lived here 6 months before we bought a house, and that was it. I probably met you about a year later. Maybe
Really?
2 years later.
I see. I thought that you had been here for much longer than
2002. I moved here.
2002. Wow.
And here's a little aside for you.
Yeah.
So I lived on the other side of town from where we are now.
Yeah.
And I was here for a day, and I had no job, I had nothing to do. I was going to walk around the neighborhood and see what it was like. And there was this little punk kid with, I think, a Clash or a Ramon t-shirt. I can't remember what it was. A young kid. And I just said, it's a cool t-shirt. First person I ever met.
Yeah.
You know who that was?
I know who that was.
Yeah. That was Amelia Elsa Pereira.
Yeah.
First person I met when I moved here.
Madness.
Yeah.
And then you had the I still feel that the hole left by your old rehearsal studio, Hanson Llama, is still being felt here in the town.
Yeah, no, I opened that place. I had tried to model it on a place called Dare Studios that I worked at for years in New York. And, three rehearsal rooms, tiny little recording studio, do some stuff. And that's why I opened it. I did some research. At the time, there were no studios around other than big recording studios. There was no places for young people to go and rehearse where everything would be there. And I completely overestimated the population of the Southwest and how people travel. At least back then I did. So, I mean, because the studio in the dead center of Long Island, where there's 4.5 million people all on top of each other, you always get business. Bands everywhere popping up. And I was really shocked that there was a lot of bands in Frome and a couple less, but it wasn't, it never quite caught on the way it did in New York. And that's why eventually I shut the doors and went to private recording and split the live sound business, which is probably the best decision I made. Though I did love that place. And I do think there are, like you said, repercussions being felt today. People still playing music today that got their start there.
But the fact that it was there and there was a facility for it meant that bands were created, I think.
Yeah. I think so. I think you're right. And there when I closed, a couple other places opened up that are still going today, and they probably wouldn't have opened up had they seen it could be done, at least out here.
Right.
I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah, I did, but I do feel that it's no coincidence that there was a very strong music scene here, and then as soon as your place shut, it started. I don't know if that was because the older kids were giving up and doing other things.
Things change. I am surprised how few bands there are now. There are a few, but it seemed like everybody was in the band then to one degree or another. And we were getting people over from Warminster and Westbury, and I don't know what it's like over there anymore, Shepton, but it doesn't seem to have. But there's less places to play. Yeah, I say that, but I don't even. Were there a lot of places to play 15 years ago?
I don't know, because I was just a bloody kid, basically. And so I don't know. I don't know what the landscape was then. But I tell you what was really important about places like that is you meet people, you network.
Yeah.
I remember when I met Nick Wilton from Ghost of the Avalanche first. He was in a band called The Operation. And I was in the height of my Misfits obsession. I'm sure you remember. And well, there you go. Over there, I got my Misfits jacket all over there, and he had a Horror Business shirt on, and that was it. And we've been like tight ever since, based off of that. Me having to speak to him as one of the older heads in the scene, wearing a Misfits t-shirt, and those kind of interactions don't happen that often.
I will say, if my studio had anything to do with it, Dan Begain when he was at the Somerset Standard with Your Time was equally, if not more important, at pushing local music. If it wasn't for that weekly boost to unsigned and local and basically kids, a lot of them. I don't think the scene would have done it. It's more of a coincidence that when the paper changed and they shifted focus and he left, that I think that was a major factor as well. It was a huge loss to the whole area for music. Those Battle of the Bands they did were really important to all the heats, and because they did them all around as well. They did a Midsummer Norton, and it's really sad. It's really sad that it's gone. He should have a statue somewhere.
But then things do move on, don't they? As you said, it's different times and things change. And I think that was a really great period of time, which I look back on.
And I sort of came in partway through it when I opened the studio. So there was a lot of bands before I got here as well. I think it gave younger people a place to play. Yeah. Even if they never went out and did a gig, it was just a place to go and make music. And this seems to be gone around here now.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah.
And so, how do you end up working at Glastonbury? What was the in there? I imagine the Glastonbury is a very different place when you got here to the place it is now. Probably much harder to penetrate now than it was.
Possibly. I mean, retrospect, I got there 2 years after the festival went through a major change and the big outside wall went up. I don't know any of this. I had just moved here.
Right.
I got in by pure accident, right place at the right time. I had a PA as part of the studio. It was one of the room PAs.
Yeah.
And I had done I was doing a lot of free gigs then, just so people would know who I was. I did a Battle of the Bands up on ECOS. And someone who worked there, who I got very friendly with, ran the third stage in the Avalon Field. Did you even know there used to be a third stage?
No.
Big, yeah, it was called Little Massive Stage. And they were friends with the cafe people who last minute said, look, we're not taking this guy we had before. Could you come in and do something really small? And I said, oh, okay. Sounds fun. I thought it was going to be a one-time thing. I went in, they called me back next year, and then the rest is history, really. Right. It's just gotten bigger and bigger every year.
And I kind of make it my Thursday night, or at some point during the festival, I try and make it a pilgrimage to come over and sort of see you guys and drink rum and at least try and spend about an hour with you.
Yeah, I've seen some of the weirdest things I've ever seen live on that stage. And it's been so much fun. Also, some of the best things I've ever seen. There's artists I never would have heard of.
Yeah.
And I get to hang out with Lloyd Grossman.
Yeah. Lloyd Grossman.
Yeah.
Oh.
And his gold top Les Paul. Yeah, he plays every year. He headlines Thursday night every year at Glastonbury for the last 8 years.
So you guys are pretty tight.
Well, as far as I can high five him every time I see him, yes.
That's pretty tight.
How's New York? How's Boston? Because he's from Boston. So.
Is he?
Yeah.
I thought he was English.
Oh God, really? No,
yeah,
he's American.
He had a very strange.
No. He was on. Remember, Nevermind the Buzzcocks.
I do.
So he was on Buzzcocks once, and they were going to try to make fun of him for being in a band. And he goes, and here's you playing Glastonbury Festival, and they put a picture up, and it was from Avalon Cafe, and it was just there was the singer Valentine doing the rock pose. Lloyd in the back with his fist up in the air and his gold top Les Paul. And this mic that looked like it was about to fall apart. And I'm like, of all the pictures, that's my mic. Terrible. And it had been through the whole festival. It was covered in mud.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was on Buzzcocks. My microphone was on Nevermind the Buzzcocks.
Wait.
Yeah.
What's the wildest Glastonbury year you've had? What's the one where you were like, oh my God, that year was batshit crazy?
I don't know years anymore.
Right.
I know.
I'm getting a bit like that, and I've only done about 4 of them.
Yeah, I've been there since 2003. We've had some weird ones. One of the worst ones we had was the ska band, who shall remain nameless, had this random hype man on the stage, and the place was packed. And we were already having a problem with crowding at the front and people trying to leap over the barrier fence.
Yeah.
Poor Luke Emery, he was on the team that year. So it was like him and me and 700 people. And the set went really well. They were fantastic, big horn sections. And then this hype man guy reached over across the divide and pulled this girl up on stage. And what followed was a stage invasion. And they all started jumping on top of our speakers and everything. Tom Pepler, who was up at the front of the house, whacked the sound down, shut it off. And we were literally throwing people over the fence. You know, Luke, I think he was, you'd have to ask him, but I would say he was absolutely deer in the headlights. He didn't know what to make of the people leaping at him, bodies flying everywhere. It was quite funny, really. So yeah, we had a rough one that year because equipment got damaged, and you know.
What happens when equipment gets damaged at Glastonbury? Do you send somebody a bill, or
no, not really?
It's just part of the gig.
It's part of the gig. Yeah.
You mentioned the Battle of the Bands a minute ago.
Yeah.
On ECOS, which is we're very lucky to have an amphitheatre on our college here. I think I was at that show.
Are you sure? We're talking. You would have been really little.
I was in. You did one.
I've
when
done
I
a
was
few,
in Bath, not Bath. I was in Froome College.
Yeah.
Remember Bradley? Is it Fusion they were called?
Yeah. Yeah.
And his bass guitar strap fell off.
Oh, God.
Anyway, that was the day I went. Let's do a band.
Yeah. This actually, the one I'm talking about was years before that.
Oh, okay.
I think In fact, I know Al Kane's band, the Manana Project, played. So we're going with ancient history.
Yeah, I know Al, and I have never heard of that.
Oh,
So
they were great. Yeah, so we're going way back. Yeah.
We're at the 1 hour. Sorry, we didn't tell you about the 1 hour. That's the Harry gives me the. We're at the 1
Have
hour.
we been talking for an hour already?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, that's a problem. We don't shut up, do we?
So how are we going to get? So we've come to the agreement. If I can get Pee Wee Ellis on the podcast, James Brown's legendary saxophonist who lives in the area,
and Van Morrison's legendary saxophonist. Yeah.
Yes, that you will come on and help me.
Help, yes.
Because you're a big Pee Wee fan. And I feel that you
I
will
know
have,
the man.
You will have decades. Well, yeah,
I
you
played with the man several
you're
times.
friends with him, but you also know his back catalogue like no one I know.
Yeah. I told you when we were at the pub at that wedding, he was just sort of sitting there eating. And I said to his wife, I said, let's see if we can get Pee Wee's attention. And I pulled out a song called Moonwalk that he had done. Or was it? No, it might have been The Chicken. And I played it, while everybody was eating. And I watched him sit there and he sort of pricks his head up and, oh, that was me. And he looked over at me and he smiled, went right back to his food. We were dying laughing.
Tell me what was that thing you were at the cheese and you were eating with him at the cheese and grain?
It was before the Ginger Baker show.
Right.
And they just had a bunch of KFC all around the table, and I was sitting around eating with them in the band, not with Ginger Baker, but the rest of the band.
Yeah.
And this is so stupid. I turned to Pee Wee and I was, because I wanted him to pass the big bucket of peas, so I just said, "Pass the peas," and he just reached over, passed it over to me. But the joke is, of course, one of his big songs was called "Pass the Peas," and I thought he would laugh, and he didn't. Either he's heard that all of his life, or he just couldn't believe how stupid of a joke anyone would say that to him. He just said, "Hey, here's the peas, and have it with your chicken."
Big thank you to this week's guest, Will Angelero. That was The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. Please check out some of Will's music and projects in the show note descriptions. Please send a review, subscribe, like. You can follow my antics on Instagram at Andy_S1S. This was produced by the incorrigible Harry Williams. Check us out next week on The Giant Pod. Thanks very much.